Simon, I want to start off with you. Uh, you work with a lot of global media organizations here at Microsoft, and from your perspective, you're seeing some shifts. And I guess I want to ask about the shifts in the way that content is being produced today. What are some of those fundamental shifts, and what are some of the pressures that are driving?
So I think we're clearly seeing changes in pipelines, primarily forced because we need to make more content faster. We probably need to understand that there are inefficiencies in current pipelines that could be better. I think there's obviously a new technology that enables us to do things in ways we've never done them before. So I think it's a combination of factors. There's probably people out there listening that are looking to be content creators and now can do things they've never done. I think more than anything else, you are going to see a very broad spectrum, right, between advertising, television, studios, right? It's all a little bit different. There is no question that there's an ability to create advertising content far faster than ever before. Brands can now reach audiences with personalization that they've never done. I would argue that every person who's involved in content is now reevaluating their pipeline to figure out how to do it differently. For a variety of reasons. Could be personalization, could be monetary reasons, could be platform reasons, a variety.
Yeah, Kevin, I don't know if there's something that you want to add to that.
No, I completely agree with Simon. And like Simon, we at Adobe see customers really challenging and understanding the notion of how content doesn't just change, but how is workflow changing? How are people's approaches to it? From a creative perspective, from an operational perspective, everything changes in the pipeline, but also in the creative process. And as we think about the creative process changing with AI, it is thinking about how are these AI models helping me do my job as a creative? And then how is that creative job manifesting into distribution through social channels, through fan engagement type channels? And how are those systems coming together to help the creatives have access to the technology and also use it in a productive way so that they can superpower themselves? And that whole pipeline is changing from all the way from the IDE or idea all the way to distribution.
Yeah. Well, we're here at NAB. NAB is a video forward show. So Kevin, I want to ask, video is a very complex, very time intensive part of content production. And so how is Firefly, and I know Firefly is much more than generative AI and creation of images and video, but how is Firefly changing the way that storytellers are doing their work?
You're right. And Firefly, the brand of Firefly at Adobe is expanding. And we started with our first party models, generative images, that type of thing. But it's expanded into a full suite of tools just for Firefly, but also within our professional tools like Premiere Pro or Photoshop. And we start seeing how generative AI can impact the creative experience inside of those tools and make it accessible for creatives to understand how to use it, but also implement it. And then as we go up the pipeline into distribution, Firefly is also a service. So Firefly is exposed as a series of APIs that, as Simon says, is a lot of the repeatable tasks that we often find our creatives are doing in the high precision tools. And orchestrating those highly repeatable tasks is it's beyond human scale. And it's this notion of additional channels are just exploding. How are you going to create content in not even the thousands, but the tens of thousands every single moment? And so that you can engage the audiences worldwide and continue to have engaging messages with that content.
So it's not just about telling one story. It's about telling hundreds and maybe thousands.
It could be. I think the story arc is the same, right? And it's telling the story to audiences in ways that resonate best with them. You could be in New York City and you tell a story one way, and you tell the same story a different way for Los Angeles, right? It's the same story arc, but the message and how the video comes together through voice and sound and the visual picture and also the on-screen graphics. Those three elements all have to come together in a creative way to synchronize the message frequently. You can change it often.
Okay, that's great. Simon, I guess I want to pivot a little bit. I want to ask you why it matters. Not just that we're able to kind of tell all these different versions of stories, but why it matters that a creative tool like Firefly and a set of enterprise tools like Copilot or Foundry, why it's important that they come together in this kind of workflow in this environment rather than living in kind of their independent silo inside of a production.
So we definitely see, for sure, an evolution in workflow. right? There is no question that the tools that you use from an enterprise perspective, whether you use Copilot or anything else, are fundamental to how you do work today. There's also no question that as you use enterprise technology, right, you're going to want to bleed that a little closer to your media workflows because I need to be able to do it at a certain scale. There's no question that I may even apply that integration a little bit differently going forward, right? In terms of whether it's Copilot that calls an API that makes something appear and comes back from an agentic workflow perspective that is now uniquely different. But I need the control mechanism of an enterprise platform, which gives me the security, the scale, the speed. Because to your point in the earlier question, Kevin, right, is the content is now entirely dynamic. It can be anything, right? Anything from a short version, a long version, a LA version, a New York version, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever it might be, right? And that is the power that those tools provide. And so when you put those tools together, right, I want access to Firefly, but I want to make sure it's frictionless in terms of how I access it, right? I don't want to have to jump through a million hoops to get it, right? And so if I want to do that, I need to figure out that every user, that even the people that are listening here today, right, it could be low code, pro code, whatever it might be, and I need to make sure that's facilitated in the right way. So it's, to me, when I'm thinking about silos, we have far too many today, right? Whether that's data or access to the right tools or how we push everything together. And so I want to speed that process up. That's why it's so important to bring it all together. You could argue that's really the secret sauce of why agentic orchestration is so critical, if I'm honest.
If I can just expand on that,
Please.
I absolutely agree. So as we look at the accessibility of AI and these automation tools, in the Firefly services side, we try to be best in class for a lot of the video capabilities that are repeatable, like changing the graphics, the on-screen graphics, or changing the voiceover, or dubbing, or preparing it for social with reframe. These types of things are complicated, right? And as we learn and as we kind of figure out how all these things come together, that agentic layer that Copilot could have on top of it manages the data that comes through. Because we forget that as a marketer, the marketer is thinking about the key message, the story, the narrative, how it all comes together, how it integrates with their audience. But that message has to come through in how the automation is orchestrated. And an agentic flow on top of that helps kind of wrangle that data message and make sure that the orchestration hits the APIs at the right level.
And at speed, right? Because speed is really critical. If you're a news organization, for example, you better figure out how fast to rebuild that pipeline to get your content out soon.
Or a sports league, right? You're getting game highlights out there and making sure that your fans are engaged and continue to re-engage on either their owned and operated properties or on social properties.
That's right. And you want access to the tools that you want when you need them, right?
Absolutely. And you want to have high confidence. Scale is really important. Security is also important. I know you and I talk a lot about security, but making sure that as we're thinking about content and preparing the content, that we're respecting that that content needs to be operating in a secure environment and deliver scale and robustness so that you can depend on when you're running a job, especially in video, that might take a couple hours. That job has to run with high fidelity because you may not have a second chance.
Yeah, exactly right.
I want to like bring it like home for, people are here or watching this later. So Kevin, help us like paint a picture for media team or production team. How might they use Firefly together with Copilot, kind of in a day-to-day operation?
I think Simon led us down that path. I think the notion of break down Firefly services down to its core fundamentals. The foundational platform is looking at highly repeatable tasks that can be orchestrated. And these orchestrations are really critical to understand. So in static image, you might have a picture of yourself who wants to put a banner in front of it. And in image, it's fairly straightforward. But in video, you have to maintain the relationship between the picture, the sound, and the graphics, and they all got to coordinate. So you've got 3 different stories all having to be synced at the same time. So that's really complicated. It's complicated for an editor or a motion designer, but when you start orchestrating it and allow AI to take over and be the assistant to these folks, that is the really hard part. And I think that's where systems like Copilot and allowing people to create their own agents to orchestrate unique workflows that hit what their goals are and achieve the intention that they're trying to reach.
I would argue it's as much a Copilot thing as it is a Microsoft platform component, right?
So I was going to ask about collaboration because that has to be a part of what is going to make these systems come together. Media teams these aren't people who work by themselves. They work in large groups. collaboration has to be an important part of making this thing fun.
Creating video is a team sport.
Yeah.
It is the most collaborative sport, I think, in the creative industry. And you look around at this show, like even the camera crew here, you've got a sound person, you've got a lighting person, you've got a camera person, you've got two in this case, maybe three, I don't know. But these are the most collaborative environments in the world. And as we think about, bringing agents and AI into the equation, they're another part of the team. And so we have people who are the craftspeople working in the tools who now have these superpowers being able to, and as you said, the platform storage and compute and GPU all need to be available and readily available when they're needed and reliably. If that's not there, it's not going to work.
It won't work, right? Just because of the dynamic nature of media, right? Is that we're up and down all of the time. We spin things up because we have certain shows that need it right there and then. We got to figure out how to tear that down, secure it safely. To be perfectly honest, I think the forgotten art is understanding where that lives within the platform, right? Because I'm going to use a multitude of different tools, right? Inside that collaboration of a platform, whether it be sending things out for VFX post-production, whether that's Firefly or something else, right? That's exactly what's going to happen. I need a dynamic platform that can understand the compute that I need when I need it, right? How do I, use storage when it's right or wrong to figure those things out? Where does the data live?
And that's super important to understand because in the old days, we used to have reserved instances, right? Where you've got machines burning time and money along the way. But now you've got to have these agentic flows so that you have the burst capacity that's there when you need it, as you said. So if you're generating graphics, on-screen graphics for a fan engagement flow, you might need to burst that really, really fast. And having an agentic layer orchestrate the infrastructure is critical.
Totally. I mean, it goes on and on, right? But to say that the platform is invaluable is probably understating it in terms of where we are, but also understanding which tools are available when you need them, like figuring out the latency for those workflows is critical. Like even where Firefly lives, right? It's hard, you just need to make sure that they work in the right way.
Right. And you bring this right back up to the creative experience. The creative experience, you need to create this environment where all of this is invisible. Right. So as a motion designer, as a creative person or a marketer, they want to make sure that when they need that video, it's ready for them to go at the time that they need it. And all of the infrastructure has to be invisible, but has to be reliable and scaling.
Got to measure it too, right? So I think for those who own pipelines or building content, whether that's real time, or on demand, whatever it might be, right? That has to exist. I think it's hard to underestimate like how critical those workflows are. A failure at any one of those points causes massive delays, right? And it's hard to manage.
And it's compounding. As I mentioned earlier, video is made up of three main elements: sound, picture, and graphics. And each one of those pipelines is different. And they all have to come together in one magic moment, multiplied by tens of thousands of times.
And they may be in real time, right, as things evolve, right? Because whatever platform you're putting on, right, it could be multi-platform publishing, right? How does that all work? And that's the dynamic nature of where we are, right? Because the expectation is everything can be personalized to you, me, or anybody else.
Yeah, and that's where the broader Adobe system comes in, because you've got data feeding in that's informing what these graphics should be. So as audiences engage, that's right, as audiences engage, that audience data needs to come back in to inform what the next step is.
This is a great conversation. I want to start to like think ahead a little bit. So if we look out 2 to 3 years, there are going to be organizations that fully embrace this moment. And I just want to like think about if everything goes right, what are the characteristics? What does the super successful organization do to differentiate themselves? What is it? How are they distinguishing themselves? What does it look like to take full advantage? You want to take this one first?
Why don't you start?
I'll talk to you in 5 minutes.
It's actually a huge question. And I think if you think about, I'll give a Microsoft perspective, but it's kind of intertwined with my own perspective, right? Which is when we think about where we are today, it's a very AI first transformation, right? So if we continue to do things the way we've always done them, which I think has a lot of merit in terms of the experience, in terms of how did they get done? I think it's important. But if I look 1 to 3 years ahead, right, we're living in dog years, right? So every month is now feels like a year with how much we're doing. I argue that we need to look at pipelines differently. We need to understand how to apply different models. And not actually also, by the way, not lead into every model. I think the platform becomes incredibly important. I think there's no question that we need to think about application layer of AI, the infrastructure layer of AI. I think the security components, the storage elements. I would argue that if you are not thinking about ripping up and understanding how to transform some of your workflows, where AI or agentic AI could play, it's a mistake, right? Because those that lean in fast and hard, I think are going to win because this industry moves at an amazing speed, right?
And it's not slowing down.
It's not slowing down, right? And so, but I will argue also, there's one other thing that I think is really critical to mention, right? Because you asked about where do they need to be, what's it going to look like, but I'd also argue that maybe we've inverted the business model. Distribution is now relatively easy, but IP itself or unique IP is really valuable, right? You only have to look a little bit to see what's been released recently, right? And how unique IP really matters. So even if we use AI to build stories, I'd argue that that universal, that value of that first party, the IP is exponentially valuable, in my opinion.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything. I think that when you rethink pipelines, bringing agentic flows and having it orchestrate in those new systems. If you're not thinking about it now, you should start. I think I want to kind of go back to the change management part. So we have, a wide collection of creative people who use all this technology every single day. And when we think about how the future of those creative teams are going to work, the future of how they work and how they contribute, that change management is critical to understand. So it's imperative that we listen, that we understand what these people are doing and how they're working and find ways to improve it. And I think that leads to the technical piece, right? With the pipeline changes and supporting infrastructure, but understanding how the jobs are done today and how those jobs can be augmented at scale to allow these the creative people to make that happen. That's really important. And then at the marketer and at the brand level, being able to use videos, or at the media company level to engage with audiences worldwide, understanding the intention of your video production is critical. Like, what is your intention? What do you want to do? What channels do you want to get to? What audiences do you want to target? Understanding the intention informs the whole pipeline, because that's the start. It's not about searching for assets anymore. It's about saying, I want to go reach my audience on a social channel.
You set me up because I was going to talk about connected intelligence for just a second, right? Because I think if you boil it back down to a little bit about what you talked about, which is I need insight to figure out what I want to do, right? And so I would argue today that across most media platforms, we don't have enough insight, right? In terms of, consumer feedback about how content really worked. What was the ideation that happened maybe during the early storyboarding phase in terms of what could have worked or didn't work? And so enabling that IQ to live within that pipeline becomes so critical, right? Better decisions.
Yeah, it's somewhat like performance media. Right? Performance media, and what we think about at Adobe is as a piece of media is trafficked out there. What worked about that media? And in video, what was the sequence that worked? What was the hook that latched on and created an emotional reaction to the audience? What was the soundtrack? What was the voiceover? What was the tone of the voice? These things need to come back to the creative teams, but at a scale that is, exceptional today. And right now we get feedback, old school feedback from data and analytics, but now we've got to have this real-time feedback coming in to inform not just the creative work, but the intention of the work and how that intentional work will iterate over time and evolve to a stronger engagement outcome.
I think this is terrific feedback. And if you think about 2 to 3 years out, it's really about more intelligence, more insight, and then being able to action off of that at lightning speed. I think that's,
we don't do that enough today.
yeah. All right. I'm going to wrap this up with just probably the hardest challenge of the day, which is to try to keep the responses to one sentence. So the question is, what is the future of content production in this AI powered world? Let's see if we can do it. Simon, one sentence to you.
I would argue that there is a place for every type of content in this new world. What I mean by that is that AI will enable stories that have never existed. And I think there is an immensely powerful place for that. I think whether short form, long form, or whatever, I just fundamentally believe that we've seen technology transformations before. And I believe that this enables amazing stories to be told that were never told before. Love that.
I think that in this next generation is how creatives will use and access technology to realize their story potential. And that potential, into 2 sentences. I think that potential is manifested through a better understanding of the intention of where they want to go, who audiences are, and how they want to reach. And I think that's going to be the future.
Kevin, Simon, thank you both very much. Thank you to all of you.
Chris?